Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Christina Yan Zhang, CEO of the Metaverse Institute. I also co-chair the United Nations International Telecommunication Union's task group on pre-standardization for the Cityverse, where we're looking at how to use AI, digital twins, metaverse, and other frontier technology to create people-centered, planet-friendly digital future. I'm very honored to be joined by such a distinguished group of leaders today. And as you can imagine, we are living in a world where technology is really moving fast. Where some might thinking, metaverse is, developing a little bit slow, but definitely not in this part of the world. You might remember that Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, said, the next major breakthrough in AI is actually using 3D virtual world to train humanoid robots at scale, which is the $50 trillion US big opportunities in the years ahead. And also, I noticed that there are many organizations in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE, looking at using quantum algorithm to fast-track drug discoveries, which perhaps that within our lifetime, we can eliminate cancer and all kinds of disease. And then we are in a position to have a beautiful scenario that we can eliminate all disease. And many of us will be able to live all the way to 120 years old, as The Economist magazine has predicted in 2023. And then we will have a beautiful situation. When you reach age 60, you don't need to retire. You're only middle-aged. You have another 60 years to go. How wonderful will that be? And you see, that's the kind of exciting speed of technology we're dealing with on a daily basis. So I guess it sounds a little bit difficult for regulators to keeping up with this speed of innovation every day. And I personally think maybe we need to invite Tom Cruise to go back to Abu Dhabi and invite some of our regulators to join him for the next Mission Impossible to make it possible. So my first question to our very distinguished guest here today is, how can we make a balance to regulate all kinds of different innovations and ensure we do not over-regulate or under-regulate? Nama, may I invite you to make a start, perhaps?
Thank you very much, Christina. I think, let me start by just taking a step back. We're seeing so many attempts from different regulators across the world at the moment. And one of the keywords is fragmentation. So there is no set sort of global regulation just now. And I mean, the one important thing is that at least all the regulators agree that we need to regulate AI. I think it's already a very good step forwards. So when it comes to the region, I think there is an opportunity for the regulators to craft a unique AI regulation by blending the best of all of these global sort of practices. And the first one I would pose on is the gradual oversight. I think it's very much inspired by the sort of EU approach and EU philosophy, where adopting a risk tier methodology helps basically regulate more, I would say, lightly the systems that have minimal risk or less potential impact. And on the contrary, be more stringent on the systems that have a potential for harm, basically. Obviously, you wouldn't regulate the same way a chatbot for customer service and a system that's used for AI in the medical field, right? The second approach that is slightly coming from, I would say, a different front is the sector-specific. And the sector-specific is very much in line with the US approach, with the US executive order. The US view is that each one of the watchdogs, or I would say regulators, have its specific domain of expertise, and they're the best position to basically regulate this specific area. So for example, if you think about transportation, then the Transportation Authority would be able to issue its own regulation. If you think about the health or the, let's say, banking, let's say central bank would be the one to issue these rules. So I think it's important because it keeps the rules very nimble and close to the industry, and they would be much more relevant. Obviously, all of this regulation has to be adaptive, and we need to continuously learn as we go. I mean, you've heard in the other panels that the pace at which AI is evolving is just unprecedented, and that's the case. And there is a definite need for the regulation to be adaptive. So it's not the one, setting the rules once and then gone for years. No, it's really about setting the rules and regularly taking sort of feedback on the impact of these rules and how they're impacting the markets. And before I move on, I think one of the good practices we have already adopted in the UAE, for example, with some other industries like the fintech, is the sandbox approach. And the sandbox approach is very important because it helps the regulator test in live environment with live data alongside innovators and learn basically what the issue can be. So I think promoting more and more these sandboxes is going to be critical in the future. So if someone else wants to comment, I think there's a lot to say here.
Wonderful. Dino, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, yeah, no, happy to. And I think you're right, Christina, as you said, these new technologies, there is a wave of them coming towards us. And as a country, the UAE, we want to be riding that wave. We want to be, on top of it and letting that wave carry us forward. We don't want to be drowned by it. What helps us to ride that wave is good regulation, good balanced regulation. I think you made some very good points, Naima, about the need to balance principles, to ensure that there are proper principles, to ensure as much as you can that it's future-proofed and it's flexible and adaptable. And I think that's the way forward. That's the way UAE tries to regulate. But I think the key for me, perhaps, and you mentioned sandboxes, I think they're a great idea. Because I think the key for regulators is to have knowledge, to understand what these technologies are, what they're doing, and what they're capable of doing. And it's a very hard balance to strike for regulators who are used to, and lawyers, we look at, what is the harm caused here? What is the problem? But if we don't know the technology, if we don't understand the technology, it's very hard to say, well, it could cause X, Y, or Z problem. So I think deeper understanding, collaboration, and certainly from the UAE's perspective, looking at what is best practice out there is going to be the way forward.
That's wonderful. Talking about best practice, I think Microsoft has been doing a lot of wonderful work for the Middle East. So Ali, what's your opinion?
No, I think, first of all, I agree with my fellow panelists. I think there's a lot of great work happening globally. There isn't one unified approach, and that is a bit of a difference as compared to GDPR in a way. When GDPR came out, many countries adapted their own legislation, but essentially said it's similar to GDPR. With AI, I think we're seeing a much more wait-and-see approach. So the EU AI Act was released, but countries are not necessarily rushing to put out their own regulations. And I think there's a few reasons for it. Some are mentioned, but one I'll highlight is often, and as a lawyer, my kind of fraternity of colleagues is guilty of this. When you see a problem, you think a law is required, right? Or you see a new technology, you think a regulation is required to address it. And in many cases, and I think AI, within the AI sphere, many of the legal issues that are raised by AI can be addressed by existing laws. Perhaps copyright, trademark, as one example. And so I think countries that are not in a rush to adopt new regulations are probably in a good place because they're seeing how the other regulations will operate, how they'll work. Creating a regulation, publishing a piece of paper does not necessarily address the issues that it may intend to raise. So seeing how it may work in other countries, other locations, understanding the technology, to Dino's point, I think is critical. If you don't fully understand the capabilities of the technology and how it will impact society, regulating it effectively will be a challenge. And then obviously balancing the regulation with the need to ensure continued innovation will be critical going forward.
You're absolutely right. Simon?
I think the sector point is really important. The Financial Conduct Authority in the UK is taking the same sandbox approach as the UAE, so it can model future changes and try and assess the impact of that policy in the market. And I think they're doing that to see if their intention on how to protect the market or how to move the market in a particular direction is probably going to happen, because that's what happens in the sandbox. And I think if you don't take that approach, you are at risk. There was an Australian example called RoboDebt, which was intended to deliver a fair outcome to assess if you'd been overpaid or underpaid by the government, and that was driven by an algorithm. and they hadn't tested the algorithm in a sandbox sufficiently. So the data sources they used gave some unfair outcomes to members of the gig economy and temporary workers, because it wasn't in the model that the algorithm was using. And that ended up costing the Australian government 1.8 billion Australian dollars, which probably wasn't the effect or the intention that they were looking to have when they put in a system to make everything fair. It didn't do that, and probably cheaper and more efficient, and it didn't do that. So I think you need to have a very clear idea about what your regulation is intending to do, and then have a way of testing that before you put it live. So sandboxes, I think, are a very good way to do that.
That's really interesting. And we also know that there is another really important question perhaps all of us need to be aware of. Do you know there are actually over 7,000 languages spoken in the world, but the percentage used to train large language model is significantly lower. It's only 100 of them. And English is spoken by about 20% of the global population, account for 2/3 of the internet, and 90% of training data of LLM. And then we have been doing lots of wonderful Arabic LLM training in Abu Dhabi. For example, JACE by G42 and Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, NOR by Technology Innovation Institute, etc. However, AI's deep bias towards English language data still exists. So beyond current achievements we have been doing, how can we fundamentally reduce the language bias for the 422 million global population who speak Arabic and ensure true linguistic inclusivity in AI? Simon, can I start with you this time?
Look, I think it's probably the high-level answer is to give it more data, to train it on more languages, to give it more access to different languages beyond English. We ran a project last year seeking to help our colleagues. A lot of the work that we do is in English and Arabic, and you need to have legally equivalent language in the contract or in the company resolution. And we tried using the general models trained on the general use of English, and we found that they were not sophisticated enough. They could give a translation that was good enough for a briefing, but if you were trying to match the English words and intent, legal intent, to the Arabic equivalent, that was very tricky. And so the solution was to train the model on 10,000 Arabic legal sources. And so the first feedback we got was, look, this isn't as useful as just doing the manual translation. But once it had been given exposure to the subtleties and nuance of the Arabic equivalent of what the person was trying to express in English, and those dots were joined, then the users sort of were comfortable using that. And the standard we were using was to get as an equivalent a matchup as possible between, as equivalent as a manual translation. And I think that sort of speaks to the confidence of users using these systems, that if you can show them a result that is as good as or better than what they've got currently, then they will adopt and become more literate in the technology. And I think probably as we go forward, more models are trained over here in the UAE, and then perhaps start talking to each other in the background. I've got no idea how you do that. Then perhaps that bias will start to disappear.
Thank you. Nama.
I'll try and make it quick. So a couple of elements from my perspective. There's a lot of great initiatives out of the UAE. And it's not only out of the UAE, I would say out of the region. There's also, I think we're talking about probably 4 new LLMs that are Arabic-driven in 2024 only, some coming from Qatar, some coming from KSA. And what we see is that if we put the effort, there is definitely a potential to sort of break this linguistic bias. And a couple of elements that I think should trickle down for this to happen is you need to have more open source, good quality training data in Arabic language. At the moment, it's only 0.6% of the web content that is in Arabic. So that shows you that you're starting with like a big sort of gap right from the beginning. So we need to work at making these data sets more available, look into Arabic literature, look into sort of Arabic educational content, newspaper, news content. So it's very important to sort of federate all of these efforts and having these banks of Arabic data of good quality. The second one is benchmarks. Well, we don't have a benchmark for Arabic LLMs at the moment, or anything that is quite universal or recognized. So it's important to have the right language, the right benchmarks. And my final point would be around the tools. I mean, if you want to build an Arabic LLM for Arabic users, it's important for you as a builder to have a suite of Arabic tools to help you in this endeavor. So these are my thoughts.
Thank you. We know that AI is not perfect. There is various challenges we need to address. For example, the environmental impact of AI. But we are very delighted to see that actually the Abu Dhabi government has made a major announcement last year to invest in a company called Zap Energy, looking at using nuclear fusion, which promised to be able to produce carbon emission-free electricity, which can potentially power our whole planet by another 100,000 years, which is truly amazing. But another issue, perhaps, which has been brought up quite a few times today, is about deepfake. The latest figures show that since 2022, the number of incidents of deepfake-related scam has actually increased by 20 times. That's a lot, right? And also, there is a very prominent case that is really sending us a very strong warning. We need to deal with this quite urgently. There is a famous UK company called Arup, and they actually have been involved in many of the developments in Abu Dhabi, including the Masdar City, for example. And in 2024, one of their Hong Kong employees had a conference call with a group CFO and other senior colleagues in London. And after that call, he transferred 25 million US dollars to a bank account. In the end, unfortunately, he was not really talking to the group CFO and other senior leaders. He was talking to the deepfake video generated by criminals. So my question to my panel is, with the prevalence of deepfake-related scam, how can we actually address this effectively? Because that can literally happen to every single one of us, anytime. Yeah.
True, and I'll perhaps start this, but I think it's, deepfakes are one of those areas, as mentioned by Ali, where we can look at that and say, do we have any laws in the UAE today that reference the word deepfake? No. But that's not to say that the issues that are caused by deepfakes aren't already regulated in UAE law. So we have a cybercrimes law which deals with things like online fraud, identity theft, libel, etc. So aspects of what a deepfake, the result of a deepfake, could be caught by the cybercrimes law, other criminal laws, intellectual property rights, and privacy rights as well. So I, as a lawyer, have a number of different tools. If I'm looking at how do I combat the threat of deepfakes, what is the harm that's being caused, and can I bring action against a person causing it? Do I need an extra law that specifically covers deepfakes? Maybe not. By the time I write that law and think about it, probably the technology's moved on again. And so I think it's a good example of an area where this is it is a problem, it is a threat. It was brought up this morning by His Excellency Mohammed Al-Kuwaiti, talked about this as a significant chunk of the cybersecurity threats to the UAE. But we have the tools, we have the existing tools to address these risks. And I think it's, challenges are more around, how do we find the person that's causing a deep fake rather than, what can we do to stop them?
Good. Simon?
I think there's probably, we just need to accept that fakes are possible, and the more information that you put out there publicly, the more potential that you've got to suffer a fraud event. And I think we're taught in our professional lives to look at that, look at, who should have information, who should have a document, is it sensitive, is it restricted, do they need to know it? And those principles have been well established in professional lives for a good while now, 5, 8, 10 years, I think, and supported by the tools when you're sending emails, for example. I don't think I or anyone I know, with the exception of my brother-in-law, I think, have thought about it in terms of the personal data that you're putting out when you're using apps, when you're sending photographs on WhatsApp. He runs large chunks of technology for the Bank of England, and a decade ago, when my niece was born, he was very, very firm that he didn't want any information, pictures of her in circulating on widely available apps. And yet he's restricted their environment because he knows how to do that. And so he protects the elements of the data of his family that he doesn't want to make widely available. And I think we probably need to sort of go through an education process of recognizing that the capacity to fake is already here. And people should be thinking about their data and how to protect that, and perhaps asking apps, look, I gave you my data so I could share a photograph with my friend or family member, but how is that being used behind the scenes to influence recommendations that I'm getting from Amazon or Instagram? So again, it's the intention of why you're releasing your data. It might be to grow your profile on LinkedIn. You want that data publicly available so people can find you. Or it might not be. It might be data that you want to keep private, but behind the scenes, the systems and algorithms are generating recommendations for you or on selling that. And so I think that's probably a mind shift that needs to happen, that we should be as protective of our own data and think about how we want it to be out in the world and being used as we are when we're at work and sharing information.
Absolutely. And I think another major issue is how can we address the global digital divide? Bear in mind that when we're talking about all this amazing wide range of emerging technologies taking part in different parts of the world, we still have 2.6 billion population in the world, which is 1/3 of our fellow citizens are suffering from the global digital divide, which means they are not even connected with the internet. So I wonder, how can we ensure AI and other emerging technologies are developed in a way to ensure no one is left behind? Ali.
Sure. I think it's a very important topic in terms of, as you said, ensuring that people have access, but also ensuring that people understand how to use the technology. So our President Brad Smith talks a lot about diffusion of AI, and if we look at past technologies, the countries that really succeed in terms of use of a technology and adoption of the technology are not those that have it available, but those that diffuse it across society. So they have as many people as possible across society with the skills and knowledge of how to use that technology to their benefit. And that's really where you can move the entire population along in a country. For example, in the UAE, we, as Microsoft, announced in partnership with the government, a project to skill 1 million people in the UAE in the next couple of years. And similar projects, similar programs are being rolled out globally. And I think forward-looking countries, forward-looking leadership recognize that you can't just have an elite class of people in the country that understand the technology and how to use the technology. You've got to bring everybody along at the same pace. And that idea of diffusion across the economy, across industries, is a really critical factor to make sure that happens.
That's amazing. And actually, when I arrived in Abu Dhabi yesterday, the first news I see, which is spread around the world, is the UAE has now officially made AI literacy as part of the students' curricula all the way from kindergarten to high school, which I think is absolutely transformational. So a big congratulations to all of you. That's a major, major thing for the rest of the world, really. So going back to the skills thing, I know, Nama, you guys are doing a lot of wonderful work in different, related areas. Do you want to tell us a bit more?
So from my perspective, when it comes to digital literacy and bridging this gap, there's the connectivity. So it's about having everyone connected. It's number one. Number two, it's about having access to this compute power for the innovators. And I'm especially thinking of the underserved communities in regions where they're not as, I would say, privileged as we are when it comes to accessing technologies. And this is where there should be incentives and multiple type of incentives, whether it is tax rebate, whether it is sort of these investment towards this community. I think it's important to always target these elements, connectivity, compute, and digital literacy. And literacy starts early. We're talking about everything that is around education, but it's also about bringing all of this population that was not AI native up to speed. It's about getting all the generations that were not born with iPads in their hands to become sort of AI fluent. And imagine in these underserved communities, it's already a challenge in the developed world. So in these underserved communities, it becomes a much bigger sort of challenge to tackle. And this is where there's all of these informal ways through the communities to help, I would say, train the trainers, have people that have the skills, share it with their communities. So I think this is where the non-profit have a big role to play alongside bigger investors to support these development.
That's wonderful. And as pointed out by the Secretary General of the United Nations, preventing a world of AI haves and AI have-nots require really forward-thinking regulations. And what we have seen that's taking place in Abu Dhabi and UAE is really taking the world as a leader, as a proactive leader, to champion many groundbreaking initiatives, which are not only going to have a positive impact for this city, this region, but also to the wider societies at large. So I would say what you guys have been doing using tech for good and underpinned by clear regulatory framework is really what we all can learn from you guys. So let's unite our efforts, combining compassion with innovation and regulation to accelerate UN Sustainable Development Goals and make our world a better place for all. And let's do it now. Thank you very much again for your wonderful achievements.